Good to be back, man.
Back in the chairs again.
Yeah.
All right, so this is your pick. Shattered Glass, 2003.
Yeah.
What made you pick it?
So I was working at World of Video and it came out, and it was in the new release section, and I took it home, and I think I had seen Hayden Christensen in Life as a House a couple years before that in the theater.
Kevin Kline?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I forget who directed it, but it was pretty good. It was like a 3.5-star movie, and he impressed me. There was like some Paul Dano, like just like, oh man, like there's a smart actor, emotionally connected actor.
Yep.
And then, so I took this home, and it just, something about the script grabbed me, man. Just right off the bat, I was like, this is a smart movie. Like, I can't believe how well written this is. And then the level of character work started happening, and I was like, oh man, like this is, and it was riveting to me. And I've gone back, and you know how you talk about those movies that you keep going back to?
Yeah.
I've seen this probably 6-7 times now, man, which is a lot. I mean, I've studied it.
Yeah.
And I know its anatomy well. Like, it's like really, like it's very like potent to me. So, what was your experience with it?
So it's weird because I don't know why I didn't see it when it came out, because it was in the air, especially amongst like film students. It was like, hey, have you seen Shattered Glass?
Right.
It's about, and I for some reason I didn't, and then thank God that you picked it, because I finally watched it, and it's a screenplay movie. It's a movie, like I would compare it to like something like Spotlight, where it's all about the writing and the way they cast it so well that all the actors just have to service the screenplay, and vice versa. It's not going to the major criticisms, like the major criticisms of Spotlight, where it was that it's just kind of a documentary that just set up a camera and people act, and I'm like, well, you know, that isn't documentary a film.
Right.
So it's not going to wow you with style, but what it wows you with is just how smart it is, how structurally sound it is, and the performances, man. Like
Sarsgaard,
he's the MVP for me.
Yep, me too.
I know
me too.
that. I know that Hayden Christensen is great and he plays his part really well.
Yep.
And I feel like for people who don't like Hayden Christensen,
because of Star Wars,
because of Star Wars, or just that you don't think he's that great of an actor,
right.
You could watch this movie and still hate him. But that just goes to show you how well he's playing the character. Because I wish I had watched it and not known what the end game was, because knowing it, I felt every decision that he made in playing this type of character, and the little touches that he puts in there. Like,
when you
are
go,
you mad at me?
Trust me, when you go back in again,
you're
going to notice things he does where you can see someone inside someone pretending to be someone, pretending to be someone. You can see it in his eyes. He does little things where he smiles, or he little Edward Norton in Primal Fear type touches, where you're like, oh man, he really considered this, and like it's brilliant to me. But like you said, Sarsgaard, the character on the page is just so strong, and he knocks it out of the park. Like the righteous indignation he has it's just beautifully played,
and it's valid. Like, I love that the character is set up in such a way that you're like, oh, he's the young hothead who gets a position of power, who played the political game so well to get in that position of power, and he's just going to hold it above everyone. And the way the screenplay is structured so that flip happens is so beautiful. And he plays it so, like that whole scene, like you feel so tense and just awful watching it, but the whole scene where he makes him take him to the hotel and show him all the things, and the look on his face, and just how, not just the betrayal, but do you realize how, like, you're screwing me so much right now? Like your career is gone, my career is gone.
The thing is, what to me, what makes it even more cool is that I almost feel like it's bigger than even just a personal effrontery. Like, he's taking it personally that he has no journalistic integrity.
Right.
He believes in ethical journalism to the extent that, like, he's taking it personally that he has done this.
Right.
And when he finally connects that he did all this, like, it's very Usual Suspects, right?
With the
very much, And he goes, "You're fired." It's like, what? He goes, when he goes, "I'm not going anywhere with you." It's a hell of a story, Steve. Like, oh, it's good, man. Dude, so I was reading that Billy Ray, it's pretty cool just the way everything went down, because it was like, he really wanted to make the movie because he studied journalism, he idolized Woodward and Bernstein, and it didn't get made. It got shelved for like 2 years, and then Tom Cruise and his production company come in, take it over, and then he originally wanted the when he realized halfway through that Stephen Glass isn't the protagonist. Like, it's just this, like, oh, Chuck is the protagonist.
Right.
And then they framed Stephen's character around "Are you mad at me?" Like, that was like, so it's just so cool the way that develops, you know? And then you're left with this completely different story than it could have been.
Mm-hmm. You know what, it also kind of reminded me, because it's kind of like it's a character study of a sociopath,
right?
In the way that it's almost like if The Social Network hadn't hit the zeitgeist the way it hit, this movie could almost have been that movie. It just didn't, you know. Social Network has the internet, and the internet is everything and everyone, right? But this movie has that same type of microscopic look at a sociopathic mind, and how it manipulates and how it works almost in self-service to himself.
Did you see Fire, or do you know anything about the Fire Festival and the fraudulent, like, this guy Billy McFarland? It's very similar, because it's like, here's a guy who, if he had just, like, done, like, things that were ethical, like, could have done anything, but he was a hustler, and he lied and covered up his lies with other lies, and it's like, it's you know, it's one of those things where it's like Don Draper almost, where you're like, you're so good at lying that you convince yourself that it's the truth. So you actually don't feel like you're lying anymore. Right. Like, there's scenes where I feel like he believes he's telling the truth. Right. My brother and I aren't even speaking right now. Okay, those are real people. Like, I think he thinks he's telling the truth. That's how good at it he is. And it's like, and the reason I brought up the McFarlane thing is because it's like, he was so good, his imagination was so rich that, like, why didn't you write fiction?
Right.
Like, why are you giving yourself the burden of reporting facts if you're so good at writing fiction? What, you know, it just seems like...
Yeah, so misplaced.
Right. Yeah.
Do you know anything else about Billy Ray? Because...
Yeah. Well, I mean, not necessarily biographically, but he... as a writer?
Well, have you seen Breach?
Yeah.
Yeah,
like
I saw that.
Yeah, and that's the only other movie he directed.
Right.
But he wrote Heart's War, State of Play, Captain Phillips.
Yeah. I stumbled upon, after seeing Breach, I stumbled upon an interview that he did, and it must have been in between, either just before Breach or right around the same time as it. but it was about screenwriting, and it's just such a cool story because I think one of his first screenwriting credits is Color of Night, and he was like,
it was such a sleazy, fun B movie.
But he's like, I had this aspiration to be a great screenwriter. He's like, my dad was a famous Hollywood reader, and when I went to him and said I want to write screenplays, he's like, okay, and he handed him Alvin Sargent's screenplay for Ordinary People, and he's like, that's the bar right there, and if you're going to take this seriously, that's where you got to hit. So he took it and dissected it and everything, and he's like, I'm writing all of this crap, and he knew he was writing crap, and he's like, it was embarrassing, because I'd be on the golf course or in meetings, and people would ask me, oh, what movies have you written? And he's like, I'd have to list off a bunch of crappy movies.
I mean, Color of Night was like a bomb.
Yeah.
It was like, it's known for that. When that came out, that was like one of the, and it's actually not that bad, but it's like, like those bombs, it takes on a life of its own.
But then he's like, I always knew that I could do better, and out of that drive and starvation came Shattered Glass.
Awesome.
He found that story, and he's like, this is my story. This is everything that I want to do as a screenwriter. I can do with this story.
Right, and you hone your craft until that calls.
Yeah,
and then you recognize it when you see it.
And it's there, I think when I knew that he wrote Captain Phillips, when I was watching it in the theater, it's like I can see the touches, I can see what he brought to it. And I can see how he took this, essentially like this great suspense thriller and added a heart to it and a humanity to it.
Yeah.
Just from watching Breach and watching, even things like Heart's War.
I love Heart's War, man.
Has a really good beating heart to it.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
And people talk like they actually talk in his movies.
Yeah.
Which makes for great. I mean, the performances, especially with Sarsgaard, it feels like a play, in a good way. Like it's like, oh, this dialogue is like really good.
Right. Like
this is like quotable, like classic dialogue.
Right.
And also, there's no shortchanged characters. Like you've got Steve Zahn and Rosario Dawson, and at first it's like Steve Zahn is like sort of the leader of this charge, but then like Rosario Dawson has that great moment where she wants the byline and she like loses it, and like everyone else in the office is like that, and it's like she kind of establishes her own like tenacity of like I'm as interested in this as you are, and that great scene between them that feels very much because they are the Woodward and Bernstein of this story. And when she says, or when he says, do me a favor, call this number the same time I do. It was a major software company with one phone line.
Right.
It's just great, man.
Yeah.
Because people who take down these kinds of things, they are just always thinking on their feet. And it's just like, I mean, it was really great to watch them put together this puzzle.
Well, when the writing is so strong, watching, for lack of a better word, detectives detect and do it well, it's so gratifying and delicious to watch. Chloe Savini, I mean,
great.
She's one of the great unsung heroes.
Yeah, definitely.
Independent cinema.
I mean, was she in Kids? That was like really the first breakout role.
And then Boys Don't Cry.
Right.
With Sarsgaard. I mean, that's why I think like Sarsgaard is kind of like in that echelon of Sam Rockwell, where it just seems like they can do anything.
Right.
You can just look at Boys Don't Cry and this, and it's like they're two completely different people. Right. But also in the interview with Billy Ray, he said that, one of the great things that you can do as a screenwriter, like your job as a screenwriter, is to provide dilemma. And he listed off like what he thought was he's not saying these are the 5 greatest films ever written, but they're great screenplays to study. And I think it was like Rocky, Wizard of Oz, Broadcast News, Network. I forget the other one. But he was saying, like, he's like, in Broadcast News, at the end of the movie, does she get on the plane with William Hurt or does she not?
Right.
And either way, she loses something. If she gets on the plane, she loses her integrity. If she doesn't get on the plane, she loses William Hurt. Same thing with this. It's like, does Peter Sarsgaard protect him, or does he out him for what he did?
Right.
And it's hard because either way, he's going to lose something.
Right. It's very true.
And then, but again, like once you make your character decide that, then you can also decide to reward them for it. And with as Rudy-ish as it feels, it doesn't come off that way when he walks into the meeting and he has that apology from
and he says, "I thought I was going to have to say all this to you." Right. It's not cheapened in any way. My 2 favorite scenes in the movie are when he's outside the restaurant with Hayden Christensen, and I don't know. There's something about like Hayden. It's like Christensen like looks at him like a cornered rat. Like he's just literally like so much of his real personality comes out in that scene. You're supposed to support me. Right. You're like, oh my God, you lunatic! Like how do you not But and then Sarsgaard's scene with Chloe Sevigny. I just have to find the line because the writing is so good that I just have to say it verbatim. When he says, first there's a line when he's talking to the editor of the digital newspaper, and he says, "Can we talk here, editor to editor, completely off the record and really almost human being to human being?" Right. You guys have discovered something a Treble Kid has done. Like something about the writing there is so real. Like it's how someone would talk, and it shows his level of empathy. It really establishes a lot. Billy Ray talks about how characters, dialogue, it's there to reveal. It's to show things that the characters reveal about themselves, and then the camera's there to just catch everything else, which is just a great way of putting it, right? And that's perfectly exemplified here. And then he says, where is it? I got it.
Because that line it's like, that's the line he says, and underneath it he's saying, please don't destroy this kid's life.
Right. He has so much empathy, but it's slowly diminished as he realizes and it's brilliantly controlled how much you see. You discover things in the same way that the other characters do, so that when the final reveal happens, you're like, holy crap, in the same way that they do. He said he's talking to one of the bosses of the newspaper, or the magazine. He says, he doctored his notes. Just consider that for a second. Doesn't that offend you? And then the other guy says, there are political considerations to take into account here, which I thought reminded me of, the Harvey Weinstein, and also like the just various cover-ups that happened because of political considerations. It's like, well, think about what happens if we do this, okay? And then, but what I was getting to is he says, I'm gonna find it. He says, we blew it. He handed us fiction after fiction, and we printed it as fact. Just because we found him entertaining. It's indefensible. Don't you know that? And then, just when that scene with her, when he says, you've always been such a smart, thorough reporter. Like, why aren't you being one right now? If this was a stranger, you would fact check the hell out of it. It's like, just really, really strong writing, man.
And I know he doesn't like a lot. I don't know why Tony doesn't like this.
Yeah, I know he doesn't. I know.
Not to out him here, but
oh man.
But it's tough. Like, and I felt that way when I saw Spotlight, and I came out of that, and I'm like, how can anyone not see the level of just the level of the screenplay is
Right.
unbelievable, and the
Yeah.
performances in it, and it took me a while to like kind of actually calm down enough to like listen to some criticism of it and be like, yeah, I get it. I know, it's not flashy with the camera, but does it really have to be when the story is this?
I mean, I really looked I really try, having seen it so many times, I'm so used to it that I'm just like, where are the flaws?
Right.
And I really didn't find any. I mean, it's brilliantly executed. It's like from the Michael Kelly character being just as real as he is. I mean, really, like the scene when he says, "Did you ever cook a piece when I was your boss?
Right.
Did you ever lie to me?"
Right.
And he doesn't answer.
That and then he remembers so first of all, I mean, Hank Azaria is like kind of like it's like I need a what is it, like I need a designated hitter, like just come in here and just please give me something, right? Whatever it is, like if it's as outlandish as his character in The Birdcage, or if it's something like this where he has to play a real human being, he can do anything.
Yep.
But then it almost felt like it kind of felt like he was like sitting on it. Like almost like at the time he kind of knew, and if he pressed maybe, but he didn't, and maybe he saw that as a regret that not a regret, but like just something like something he didn't move forward with, where if it was anyone else, maybe he would have, and that's why he kind of has that at his disposal.
I wrote down a point or a thought I had, which was sometimes the inclination to give our peers the benefit of the doubt interferes with the carriage of justice.
Right.
And that just occurred to me. I'm like, you know what? And it happens with Sarsgaard too, man. Because he was a masterful manipulator, man. When he goes in after he knows. That's the thing. There's a brilliant mind there, man. Okay, they show how his memory's like a steel trap. He remembers this thing the woman said 4 years ago about the Diet Coke and being not cold enough at the party. When he can tell Sarsgaard is, it's very sociopathic, right? It's the ability to understand which emotional thing is needed at that moment in time. Right. So he recognizes that Sarsgaard is getting a lot of, hate in the office for taking on the position and all that. And he knows if he comes in with a sort of olive branch, that it's going to give him, and he was made associate editor. Right? That's the thing. It's like, and he portrayed himself as this self-disciplined, ethically to the letter human being, not just journalist, like human being. Right. And he has these scenes with his peers where he's like, unless you have it cold, it doesn't run. Like, I love the way Christensen plays this. I think he is like, whoa, man. Right. This is like, these two performances, I mean, and the thing is, Sarsgaard was recognized. He was nominated for at least 6 or 7 different Critic Society, Independent Spirit Award, Golden Globe, and he won like 6 of these things. But it's like, I really liked Christensen's interpretation, man. I think it was very controlled and authentic. His portrayal of anxiety, you could see the wheels turning in a really cool way, because you could see Stephen Glass pretending to be someone else the whole time.
Right. And was the whole "Are you mad at me"? Was that something that came out in research?
That was in the article.
It was.
So he used the article as a starting point, and the "Are you mad at me" thing, and created the character around "Are you mad at me," and then fleshed it out, and then realized Chuck was the real protagonist, and then he's like, whoa, the whole arc of this thing is different. Right. It's going to be like this. Right. And Stephen Glass says it's a really great quote, man. He says, what is it? Watching the film was very painful for me. It was like being on a guided tour of the moments of my life I'm most ashamed of. real quick, I wanted to read what A.O. Scott said about the film, because it was very eloquently said. A more showily ambitious film might have tried to delve into Glass's personal history in search of an explanation for his behavior, or to draw provocative connections between that behavior and the cultural and political climate of the times. But such a movie would also have been conventional, facile, and ultimately false. Mr. Ray knows better than to sensationalize a story about the dangers of sensationalism.
You know, there's not many out there anymore, but A.O. Scott is certainly one of them. Yeah, I mean, like the closest it gets to a show-offy stylistic moment like that is when they're all around and he's telling the story.
Oh, yeah. The juke my Trump. Show me the money. I want a Miata.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just the storytelling and the editing doing its job, right?
Right.
You know, it comes off more stylish than it actually is, because there's a flow to it, and it works because you're getting seduced by the storytelling the way they are all being seduced by the storytelling, and he's right. I mean, if the whole movie was just kind of like that flashiness, or just putting us into the mind of lie, and then, like, you know, having all this this facade of style, that's not the heart of the story. He knows what the heart of the story is. Yeah. And the whole thing about the "Are you mad at me?" It just makes me think of whoever the screenwriter, Frank Pearson, who wrote Dog Day Afternoon. When he was starting to write it, he's like, I don't know my way into this story, and then he starts reading articles about people talking about the person that Al Pacino played, and they said, well, he always wanted to make it. He was always very apologetic and wanted to make it nice and safe for everyone. And he's like, I know exactly who this guy is now. That's who.
And it changes the temperature of the way you play it, the filter of the way you play it, which can totally make lines different than you would have delivered them. It's brilliant, and it's like you have to find that mechanism. That, you know, I mean, it's great.
I know that I think there's a commentary on the Blu-ray or the DVD.
Nice.
But it'd be interesting because I just would like to know like the research, and then just, you know, what each actor brought to it, and him playing this part, like what were the little, because knowing what the end of the movie was and what he did and the severity of what he did, I could watch it, and like everything that he did, like I was just like, oh, he's like I see him manipulating everything and the things that he does, and it makes you not.
Well, it's like Draper, like I said before, but it's like you're torn between he's likable,
right,
but he's doing horrible things, right? So there's that moral dilemma you find yourself in as an audience member. And how many times in a movie does the hero become the villain? I mean, that's a pretty powerful, dramatic shift.
Right. And that that shift.
It's not
works.
contrived. Yeah, no. It's not extreme. It's not implausible. You know, the fact that Billy Ray is more of a writer and not necessarily a filmmaker, it really sort of leads you to believe that the editing is the real standout of something like this. Right. The coordination of shots it's a masterpiece in editing. It is beautiful. There are all these cuts in like the scene when he's taking the magazines down that don't feel choppy. They're so beautifully in sync that you don't even really notice there's editing going on, right? It's like it's so, they work so in tandem that it really shows you the way editing is like a language. And the guy, I don't think it's a coincidence that the guy edited all the Avengers movies. I mean, those things are incredibly edited. right? If you just think about how they weave in between all the, so it's kind of cool to see him doing something like this and using the same knowledge to make a much different, like literally the antithesis of the Avengers movies, right? I mean, something that could be, you know, be like, oh, this is gonna, and actually Ray talks about how no one wants to see about a movie of people writing.
Right.
How do we make this more than that? And Glengarry Glen Ross, you know, faced the same dilemma, right? And you've got to find the ways to make it compelling.
Social Network too, with I mean,
Or Network,
the typing,
to be honest. I never really thought of. I guess I have thought about it, but it's not. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's called that Network is in the title of that movie,
right?
Because David Fincher definitely seems to have been
And
very influenced by it. Yeah. Oh yeah. True.
I want to go back and, well, I'm going to watch the movie again anyway.
Yeah.
But you know how in Psycho we talked about how the scene where Norman and Marion are in his den and she's eating the sandwich. That's the moment in the movie where it shifts, and we're no longer with Marion, we're with Norman.
Right. It's like a sleight of hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that the editing and the staging of that scene is when that happens. Now, the scene in here is when he takes him to that hotel, right?
Yeah, right.
And I want to go back and watch what the camera's doing, what the editing's doing, because I want to know if
maybe there's
a moment
reveal
in there where we completely shift.
Well, Ray talks about how he wanted a conscious difference in the camera work from the first half in The Office, and then after he's being all the interview scenes, and basically when he's being interrogated, which are more stabilized.
Yep.
So I mean, it's like most filmmakers are. It's like you're lucky to have one, and he had like one. Like if it's not perfect, it's damn near perfect.
Yeah.
And then Breach is pretty great. So he got like a 4.5, possibly 5-star picture and a 4-star picture. I think Breach is a solid 4 stars.
Yes.
I think it's great. As far as like political thrillers go, I mean, it's really like.
And again,
well
another
done.
Great two-hander.
Right. Well, he screened all the President's Men for the cast and crew before they shot. I mean, clearly this guy had a love affair with the whole. Just the spirit of what they were chasing, what Woodward and Bernstein were chasing.
Right. And it truly feels like that, the same way that Spotlight did, where it's like, okay, your influences, it's Pakula and Sidney Lumet.
Right.
Like those have got to be the two people that you're looking at. And when you said that he was looking at, like, I want the first act to be different from the second act, from the third act, one of the greatest versions of that is Sidney Lumet with 12 Angry Men, where he wanted to, the whole first act of the movie is at just above eye level and wide shots. Second act, eye level, medium shots. Third act, below, and close-ups. So that, and he had the stage move in.
Well,
so
because it's a wide shot, you feel more objective.
Yep.
And then you start to hone it. The closer you are to something, the closer you feel to it. Or it's like, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's just going to change the way you feel about the subject, right?
And it's a great lesson of not just looking at your script and being like, what am I as the director doing with this story? Like, what is the point of my story?
Right.
And how am I going to convey that? Not just through dialogue and performance, but with how am I going to tell that through costumes? How am I going to tell that through the camera? How am I going to tell that through editing? And it's, you know, and this movie just, I mean, it hits it at those top levels across the board. That, in a way, you can kind of see how this would have slipped underneath the noses of an audience. But when you see it,
the truth is there, right?
Right.
You can't, you know, I always think, like, if a screenplay is great, then, man, if you can combine that with great filmmaking and great acting, boy, do you have a masterpiece on your hands. Because it's just, a screenplay is just, I mean, it's just going to give it that lift so that the people who know what they're doing can knock it out of the park, man. And it happens in this.
And then, and beyond that is just like, you know, it's Billy Ray being like, I've worked my whole life towards this story, and nothing means more to me than this story.
The article was also written by the guy who wrote the book that Friday Night Lights was based on, which is one of the best shows of all time, in my opinion. And it gets to the heart of how, once again, like how people talk and what, like, so I feel like they're cut from the same cloth, the two of them. So, and he actually helped adapt Friday Night Lights. So it's like, I think it's just, it just worked. And, you know, we talk about, it's like, the questions come up like, oh man, how do these movies like feel this truthful and feel this accurate? And it's like, because it's like, I'm reading that he enlisted people involved in this as paid consultants and developed relationships with them, gave them script approval, like, and like earned their trust so that they could know he was being as objective as possible. And I think it's just, and also the Lionsgate legal department, they told him he had to annotate the entire script and like have footnotes for each line of dialogue to like show that it was, any assertions he was making was backed up by fact. So it's like he actually put his script through the fact checking that all of Stephen Glass's articles should have been. So that's his level of his respect for journalistic integrity, which is like the heart blood of the picture. So when you care that, we've talked about it with so many other filmmakers, Howard Hawks, when you care, John Cassavetes, when you care that much, boy, is it easy for everyone else to care. Or how much they want to care.
Because
you have increased the level. People want to work for someone like that. And honestly, Chuck is almost a proxy of him. If you think about the culture of this movie, probably. Everyone wants to win for this guy. Because it's like, man, like, he won the win, not towards the end, until did they realize it, right? The whole time he's vilified because they've been manipulated by a charlatan, right? It's literally like a cult, the cult of Stephen Glass, and they're all part of it, and they don't realize it. And even he's part of it because he gives it credence because he is jealous of him at first. He's like, well, pretty tough act to follow. And then he goes, yeah, it was a really tough act to follow. Like that laugh he does is so revealing, man, of the pressure he puts on himself and how kind of, I don't know, man, unconfident he is. And like, it's very revealing, man. He's very intimidated in that scene. And, you know, my mom, you know, A.L. Scott said what he did about why is he like this? Oh, we need to find out why he was like this. What was his upbringing like? All those things you would see in like a true crime type of thing, right? But it's almost cool having it be ambiguous because it's like, well, okay, maybe his parents put a lot of pressure on him and that's the reason he did it and everything, but let's not take away from just the acts themselves. Let's let that be the star of the show, and let's not like search for some purpose. Yeah.
Because it's there, right? Like, what is the, because he's taking night classes and all that stuff.
Yeah, and he did end up graduating from law school, but my dad was telling me that he wasn't allowed to practice law because of what he did. So, damn, that was a tough maze to get through to find out. Yeah.
Well, he's got to get back in the directing seat again.
Oh, he definitely does. When did Breach come out? 08, I think, something like that.
Yeah, 07, 08.
07. I think it was 07 actually. Yeah. It's a long time.
I mean, I'm sure he's kind of like a. He feels like he's kind of like a Aaron Sorkin type of, where it's
he could step out,
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, but everyone knows that he's also a great writer, so they're kind of
Right.
like, come write the movie that I'm directing, or come help fix the script that I'm directing.
I mean,
right
he's
now.
stayed pretty busy as a screenwriter.
Yeah.
Guy works, And,
He's probably one of the, like, he just needs to find, he had it with Shattered Glass, he had it with Breach, and now he's just kind of, what's the next story that I'm looking for?
Christensen, it's one of those careers where you're like, I can't remember if it was my dad or my mom, we just watched it together and asked me, like, what's he doing now? And it's like, I mean, he's still doing B movies.
Well,
He just had something come out like a year or so ago, and they could be good, right? I mean, he did a movie with Nicolas Cage, where it's like, I don't know, he's still making money, and it's just kind of sad that, like, I mean, he's not getting better roles or roles in higher profile films. It's like, clearly, and is Sarsgaard still pretty active?
He shows up. I mean, I feel bad because I don't like. There's these movies that I know that he was in that I like him in, but now he's just kind of like, he's kind of like a character actor where he'll just show up in a movie.
Right.
And I think he was on. I think he was in a cable network show.
Was it Mysteries of Pittsburgh he was in? Did you ever see that? That was another one with just a solid performance. I mean, when a screenwriter gives him
I shouldn't say
the
that
right
because he was great
character.
in Education. Did you see that?
And Education. Yeah. Man, I haven't seen that since it came out.
Yeah.
I'd like to revisit that. Yeah, he's just a very natural actor, man. I think he's one of the best at moment to moment. Like, nothing's anticipated.
Right.
He is coming from such a pure place of being grounded in the character that everything's just it's so real. I mean,
and he's kind of like one of the, like, again, like a Sam Rockwell, but also kind of like an Edward Norton, where it's like, he can lay low and, like, he plays parts like this, but then all of a sudden, like, a Three Billboards comes out, a Birdman comes out, where you're like,
oh, you're
wow,
this
where
good.
were you?
Yeah. Right.
And I feel like that's going to happen, where it's like he's going to get that part where he can do what he does.
Right. He might even have been nominated for An Education. I don't know if he was, though, because I feel like that movie was nominated for a few things. I thought it did well in that department.
Ask the device that knows everything.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, it's thank you, because it's one of those movies that I love to watch because of how much I love a good screenplay. And it was like kind of like one of those things where it's like, I wish I hadn't have been so stupid as to not see it, but I'm glad I didn't, because then I got to.
But the thing is, I don't look at it as like short-sightedness or like, man, how did I not watch that? Because there's just those movies that you never saw. I mean, they could be the biggest film in the world, and for some reason it's like you can't see everything. And I feel like so much of what you watch in your life is circumstantial, and not necessarily like from your own conscious desire. It's like, oh, and then this, unless you like go on that specifically, you're like, I'm going to watch every film made by this director or whatever. Right. And so it makes it fun. And then it's like, thankfully this show exists for us to be able to see all these movies that maybe we never actually got the chance to see,
And get people to go and watch them.
Right.
I want to watch Breach again.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
So he was in Jackie, Bobby Kennedy, Black Mass.
Yeah.
Experimenter. What was that? The Killing. He was in The Killing. That's
Oh
what
yeah,
I was thinking of.
yeah, that's a great show.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did a good job in that.
It's in Blue Jasmine. That's right. Did you see Robot and Frank?
No.
Kind of a weird movie, but he was in that.
Yeah, he played the guy on death row in The Killing. Really good. Like that's the range he has. He easily could have played a character like Stephen Glass.
Right.
Right. I mean.
Rendition.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Jarhead.
Yeah.
And then Kinsey. Garden State. Then Shattered
Oh
Glass.
yeah. Yep. I mean, yeah, feels like a good point.
No, thank you again.
Yeah, definitely glad you got a chance to see it.
All right, so next week we'll do Ashes and Diamonds.
That'll be my
first time seeing that.
Yep.
Perfect.
And
I've
first
seen it.
first film by Wajda. How do you pronounce it?
Yep,
Wajda?
Andre Vida.
Vida. Vida. Glad I've learned how to pronounce that.
Yeah, that'll be an exciting one.
Yeah, awesome, man.
Yep, and then we'll finish it off with Champion, and then
Cannot
we'll
wait.
have news for what we're gonna do for our third season.
Cool.
All right.
All right.
Take care.
Yeah, man. You too.